Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're cracking open something that feels, well, like one of the most persistent and frustrating economic mysteries of the last 40 years. We're talking about the hidden calculus of housing scarcity. We've gone through a huge stack of source material on this, all trying to figure out why the housing shortage just keeps going decade after decade. And our mission here isn't to, look for a cartoon villain or some single bad actor. It's about trying to understand the fundamental mechanics of the system itself, because the central question that kept coming up again and again was this. If the shortages persist, if prices keep rising so much faster than wages, making life demonstrably harder for millions, and yet nothing really changes to catch up, who exactly is the system working for?
And that question, it sounds so simple, but it's really tricky. What the analysis we looked at makes clear is that the beneficiaries aren't, gathered in some secret room twirling their mustaches. The benefit is often quiet. It's passive. And a lot of the time, it's completely unintended. For millions of people, the primary feeling here isn't greed at all. It's relief. Just relief that a major asset, probably their only major asset, is performing well, that it's shielding them from the very instability everyone else is facing.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Because if any system is allowed to drift this far into such a painful imbalance, history tells us that someone, somewhere, is finding that drift comfortable. So that comfort, that relief you mentioned, it has to land somewhere, structurally. Where does the analysis show it lands first?
It lands first and most profoundly with the existing homeowner. And we really need to anchor this in reality. The data we reviewed, it focuses heavily on trends across the UK, Canada, Australia, and major U.S. metros, going all the way back to the 1980s. And it shows this unmistakable pattern. House prices have consistently outpaced inflation. They've consistently outpaced wages. And a lot of the time, they have outpaced the wider economy itself.
So you're saying this isn't just a cycle, like a normal boom and bust.
Oh, not at all.
This is a structural pattern.
Exactly. A structural pattern that has delivered a very specific and a very measurable benefit. This consistent, four-decade rise delivers a silent but profound form of financial security. For people who already own, that equity has just grown quietly in the background. It's often become their largest source of wealth.
Right, and that consistent appreciation means their mortgage starts to feel a lot safer over time.
Much safer. It shrinks relative to the home's value. So housing stops acting like this huge liability, this monthly cost. And it starts acting more like a dependable passive cushion.
And this is where the emotional investment really shifts, isn't it? It's not just a financial gain anymore. It becomes a reliance. Once people own this thing that's always going up in value, they don't just have wealth. They start to build their actual life plans around that rising value.
That is the key structural component. The analysis shows that this housing wealth, this quiet equity, has become the primary lubricant for intergenerational transfer. We're talking about real-world scenarios here.
Like what?
Remortgaging to help a child cover university tuition, for example, or borrowing against that equity to give them a deposit for their own place, or even just funding major life events, necessary repairs, managing a sudden job loss, or planning for a comfortable retirement.
So it stops being just a house and it becomes the family's ultimate insurance policy.
Precisely. And this reliance is the invisible glue that holds the status quo in place. Because once that equity is borrowed against, once a chunk of that on-paper wealth has been spent or, earmarked for something, a potential price fall stops being an abstract, theoretical risk.
It becomes personal.
It becomes very personal.
You're talking about the fear of negative equity coming back.
Absolutely. The old nightmare of negative equity owing more on the mortgage than the house is actually worth, it comes right back into sharp focus. It's not just some scary headline anymore. It's a quiet worry for ordinary households who use that equity as their safety net. A correction doesn't just mean, oh, I have less paper wealth. It means fewer options. It means the potential of insolvency. It means real financial losses landing on people who might be asset-rich but are often cash-poor and now deeply exposed.
And that structural reality means that even sensible fixes, like, say, building significantly more homes, can feel personally dangerous to a huge number of voters. They know the system is broken for their children, but any change that threatens their own personal hard-won cushion is going to be resisted.
And that's how imbalance turns into deep structural fragility. The fear of disrupting that comfort zone is so powerful that it creates a kind of political trap. It inhibits the very actions needed to bring some stability back to the market.
That's a powerful realization. The system traps both the struggling first-time buyer and the relatively comfortable long-term homeowner, just in very different ways.
Okay, let's pivot a little. We've been talking about the home itself, but So much of the value is disproportionately held by the land underneath it.
Yeah, and this takes us to the second accidental beneficiary, the owner of raw fixed assets, mainly land. Land is fascinating because it doesn't really depreciate, it doesn't wear out, it needs almost no maintenance, and you don't have to worry about tenants or boilers or repairs if you're just sitting on it. And yet, what we've seen is that land values, even just raw land slated for development, have risen significantly ahead of inflation for decades.
So its value doesn't come from what the land does, but from what happens around it. Is that right?
Yeah.
That's it exactly.
Huh.
What's so fascinating here is that the land just absorbs all the benefits created by society. It absorbs the value from public infrastructure spending. A new rail line, a better road, a good school district. It absorbs the value from population growth. And crucially, it absorbs the benefit of planning scarcity. When the planning system makes it difficult to turn raw land into usable plots, that scarcity premium gets baked right into the land price.
So the land underneath homes in places like London or Sydney or Manhattan ends up being worth trillions, not because of the materials in the soil, but because of this artificial scarcity of permission to build on it.
That's the engine. And the analysis reveals that in this kind of environment, waiting, just holding land and doing nothing with it, isn't laziness. It's not even really speculation. It's often the most rational, the most sensible financial strategy you can pursue. You're pretty much guaranteed a passive return that often beats effort-intensive activities, like actually developing the site.
And that logic must extend to investors and landlords who are already operating within the housing system. For them, for those already in the market, scarcity acts less like a challenge and more like a powerful financial stabilizer.
Absolutely. If you look at property as an investment class, compared to volatile stocks or long-term bonds, residential property can look unusually dependable
Why?
because the core supply problem ensures that demand is always chasing a very limited availability.
And you can see that dependability really clearly in the income stream, right? The material we looked at highlights that private rents typically beat inflation over the long run.
They do, especially in high-demand, high-scarcity areas. What that means is you get rising, reliable income for investors with, frankly, minimal effort beyond the initial capital and standard maintenance. Their property values are protected by that underlying land appreciation we just talked about. And competition stays limited because it's so difficult, so slow, and so risky for new players to come in and add any significant new supply. It becomes a self-reinforcing protective mechanism for existing capital.
So far, we've covered private beneficiaries, we've got existing homeowners getting relief, and landholders and investors getting stabilization. But now we need to transition to maybe the most awkward beneficiary of all, because it's caught in this really deep contradiction, the state itself.
Yeah, the government finds itself walking a very strange line. In the short to medium term, rising house prices offer these immediate political and fiscal benefits that are just very hard to ignore.
Okay, give us the positive spin first. Why would the Treasury secretly love rising prices?
Well, for three main reasons, really. First, it's about political contentment. Rising values make a huge block of voters. Homeowners feel wealthier and more secure.
And happy homeowners are politically stable homeowners.
Generally, yes.
Yeah.
Second, it reduces the political pressure around that negative equity issue. I mean, nobody's marching on Parliament because their house is worth too much. And third, these rising asset values can, at least temporarily, make national or local government balance sheets look a lot healthier.
But the cost side. The analysis shows the cost side is just staggering, and it's a cost the government pays immediately, right out of its budget. High housing costs push spending into critical public services, creating what the source material called a massive fiscal drag. How does that drag work?
Okay, think of fiscal drag like this.
Yeah.
When you have sky-high rents and mortgages, people just have less money to spend on other things. Discretionary goods, savings, starting new businesses. That money isn't disappearing. It's being channeled into the non-productive cost of shelter. And for the state, the most direct drag is the monumental cost of just keeping people housed. Housing benefit in the UK, for example, runs into the tens of billions of pounds every single year.
Wow.
It's a vast subsidy. And it's paid not to the poor, really, but straight to private landlords. It basically keeps the floor under market rents.
That is just a staggering transfer of wealth. And the material notes a quiet but really significant policy shift in how the state handles that cost. It used to broadly cover typical rents in an area, but over time, that support has been capped. It's now just a percentage of what the market is actually charging.
That cap is a critical moment in the system. The market, like we said, it just ignores the cap. Rents continue to rise. So what's the consequence? Well, it's in effect, a form of forced social engineering. It has forced people on lower incomes to move further and further away from job centers,
Yeah.
to compromise drastically on the size and quality of their housing, or just to squeeze their already tight budgets even harder to make up the difference.
So the state is benefiting quietly from the rising asset values in its economy, which brings political stability,
Right.
while paying loudly for the direct consequences, that
Yeah.
huge housing benefit bill, which creates social instability.
It creates complete political gridlock. The incentives are just fighting each other. To fix the housing crisis, you have to lower the rate of asset appreciation. But that immediately threatens the political contentment of millions of these accidental beneficiaries, and it reduces the perceived health of the balance sheets.
And the cost of not fixing it.
The cost of not fixing it is the tens of billions in housing benefit, plus the social consequence of, say, forcing public sector workers out of cities.
Yeah, let's pivot to our last section and just summarize the people who very clearly are paying the price here without getting any of the upside. And it's a long list that goes way beyond the cliche of just struggling young people.
It absolutely does. I mean, the obvious groups are first-time buyers and long-term renters who face constant insecurity, rent heights, and no hope of building any equity. But the non-obvious costs are borne by the wider economy. We're talking about employers who can't afford to hire or expand in high-demand areas. We're talking about public services that are losing staff because nurses, teachers, police officers, they simply cannot afford to live within a reasonable commute of where they work.
When you look at the bigger picture, it becomes so clear. This whole situation doesn't require malicious intent. It doesn't need a conspiracy.
Yeah.
It just requires a complex system structured in a way that accidentally but powerfully rewards certain actions and financially punishes others.
It's the ultimate unintended consequence. The crisis is maintained not by the greed of individuals, but by four specific structural elements that the analysis details. These things operate on a huge scale.
Okay, let's break those four down. What's the first element that keeps the status quo in place?
The first is simple. The system rewards holding. It rewards holding on to land and existing homes over building new ones, because holding pretty much guarantees appreciation without effort, while building is risky, slow, and very expensive. This shifts the whole financial logic from, productivity to passive accumulation.
Okay, and the second?
It treats rising prices as success. Despite all the massive social costs, high house prices are still used as a primary indicator of economic health. Any politician who engineers a drop in that price growth is seen as having failed, which just reinforces the political need to let values keep climbing.
What about the difficulty of just adding new stock to the market?
That's the third point. It makes supply slow and risky. Our planning and regulatory systems, often driven by local resistance from homeowners protecting their cushion, are just cumbersome. They ensure that supply cannot respond quickly to demand, which guarantees that the scarcity premium stays really high.
The time from identifying a need to actually having a finished home can be a decade.
A decade, yeah. It effectively freezes the market in place.
And finally, that fourth element, which connects back to the state's contradiction.
It pushes costs into other budgets. So instead of reforming the planning system to allow prices to stabilize naturally, the systemic costs of high housing insecurity, displacement, affordability gaps, they all get shifted onto public spending programs like that massive housing benefit bill. It's a mechanism that stabilizes asset values at the direct cost of the taxpayer.
So what does this all mean for you, for the listener? Once those powerful systemic incentives are in place, rewarding holding, treating price rises as success, slowing supply, and pushing the costs elsewhere, human behavior just follows naturally. And that's why the analysis concludes that yelling at individual landlords or developers doesn't fix anything.
You can't.
The problem isn't the actors, it's the systemic calculus they're all forced to operate within.
So our final synthesis is that the housing problem is so politically awkward, so intractable, precisely because the people who benefit most from the system's scarcity, through that quiet relief and stable equity we talked about, are often not the people who are struggling most within it. Scarcity acts as a shield. It protects the comfort of one group while actively creating profound insecurity for the other.
And because that discomfort is widespread, but the relief is so deeply felt by millions of politically active voters, the resulting policy response rarely targets the core structural problems we've discussed. Instead, you see delay, you see tinkering, or you see these politically palatable half measures that kind of chip away at the edges but preserve the golden goose of asset appreciation.
So the fundamental question, I think, for you to consider is this. If the entire purpose of a system is meant to be providing stability, What happens when the lines of financial benefit and actual social need pull so far apart?
Yeah, think about that the next time a comprehensive solution to the housing crisis is proposed. Consider how often those fixes fail, not because the economics are wrong, but because they inevitably threaten the quiet, passive relief of all those accidental beneficiaries, making the discomfort of real change seem to outweigh the essential need for necessary action.